In this video, we're going to be reviewing the Ruger RXM in 9mm. Now, I know what you're thinking. In a world awash with polymer striker-fired pistols, why review another Glock clone, right? But this isn't just another Glock 19 clone. There are some very special features about this Gen 3 Glock 19 clone that makes it radically different that we're going to be covering today. This is also based upon the most popular handgun ever sold in the world, which is the Glock 19. And it is also done in a generation that is perhaps considered to be the best generation of the Glocks ever sold, which is the Gen 3. So just to back up a little bit on the Glock 19s, the Glock 19 was first released back in 1988. The Gen 3 version of the Glock 19 came out 10 years later in 1998 and included things such as a rail, modified extractor that also has kind of a loaded chamber indicator. It added a locking block pin above the trigger pin here that you're going to see, etc. Of course, my Glock 19 here, it's a Gen 4 and it has the laser light combination, but essentially beyond that, it is largely the same type of Glock. Now, the Glock 3, as I just mentioned before, many consider this to be the best generations of Glocks. And ironically, it was just a few years ago that the Glock patent on the Gen 3 expired, which is why you're seeing a whole bunch of these new Gen 3 type variants coming out in the market today. But even despite the fact that Glock has gone on to Gen 4, Gen 5, etc., many people still believe that the Gen 3 is perhaps the best generation provided, similar to what you would see with the Series 70s and the 1911s. So now, as far as just looking real quickly at the gun itself, the RXM is a collaboration between Magpul, that basically made the frame, and Ruger, that basically made everything else. And this was a brilliant partnership because Ruger can now mass produce the components, while Magpul, and anybody for that matter with a 3D printer and a better design idea, can create an infinite variation of grip modules. And as SIG has already proved, once somebody legally buys a serialized fire control unit, once they can order as many parts variations online that they want directly from the manufacturer without completing additional background checks. The MSRP on the RXM that came out is $499, but I found this one on sale at a local gun store right at the time of release at $399. And they had a lot of inventory to sell, so immediately it sparked my interest. Was this the Glock I have always been looking for? More importantly, Ruger must think so if they shipped out so much inventory of this. So let's take a closer look at the RXM compared to, for example, the Glock and what makes it a little bit different, and then we're going to go into details about that. The first thing you're going to notice in comparison, for example, to the Glock is that there is no trigger pin anymore. There is just a locking pin. So locking pin you see above here, the trigger pin has gone away, although it is now as part of the fire control unit, which I'll talk about in a moment. There is now a new forward locking pin for the fire control unit. There is also no trigger housing pin that you would see on the grip. So this one's covered a little bit here, but you can see this, for example, on the PSA model, where you see that the locking pin here, that pin has also gone away from the grip. A couple other things you're going to notice that are advantages of this over the Glock, for example, is first off, there is a undercut on the trigger guard here. You can see this both into here and here. Now, of course, this normally is a standard Glock 19, but as usual, like most people do, including myself, I manually cut this undercutting here, but again, this was done for you out of the factory. There's also a flared mag well compared to a traditional Glock, so it's a little bit easier to speed load this type of a Glock variation. There are serrations and shelved finger pads on the frame. So for example, when you want to put your finger here, or when you hold double-handed and you index your finger here, a lot of gun manufacturers are coming out with pads now, but there's actually a shelve here as well. And you look at that, for example, compared to a Glock 19 where there is no pad or there's a shelf, etc. So it just makes it easier to, by memory, index on the frame. There's also a dehorned mag release button here. So compared to, for example, the sharper mag release buttons that you would typically see on a Gen 3, it's a little bit nicer and easier to push, and it's also easier to activate compared to, for example, these stiffer PSA dagger type frames. There's a optic cut with a metal mount at the top. So this is for things like an RMR, Delta Point Pro, RMSC, things of that nature. Again, this is a universal pattern that they're putting on here, similar to what you would see with a Glock that has what is called an MOS, which is basically an upgraded Glock that would include this. So if you're one of these people that want to run a red dot, this comes standard on this gun. It also comes with optics height steel sights. So you can see how they look here. It is a blackened serrated back end to reduce glare, and then the front end is a tritium insert with a white outline and a green center. And these are also raised sights, so they will help you co-witness when you put in your optics on here. Now these are standard Glock type sight mounts as well, so if you have a hex nut on the front, you can easily replace this with any type of Glock front sight, as well as the rear dovetail is standard Glock sizing. So again, there is a myriad of different sighting options out there for Glock. So if you don't like this type of sight, you can easily replace it, but it is metal. It stands out pretty well, so you can easily press check or do one-handed racks on the slide on your belt or things of that nature. And again, it's actually really good sights when I fired them. The front and back slide serrations are on the slide. You can see it here. There is a black nitrided finish, as well as slide cuts on the front, back, and top. So you can see the contours on the gun, both on the fronts, the backs, as well as the top, compared to, for example, a traditional Glock. Now the Glock Gen 5s have a little bit more cuts on there as well. Now here's one of the biggest differences on here, and this is what a lot of people have hated about Glocks for a long time, is the degree of angle on the grip. So the grip, for example, on a traditional Glock has a hump. That's why you see my wrap on here, because that hump kind of sticks out and it's very uncomfortable for people when they fire them. And one of the biggest changes you're going to notice that Magpul nailed it on here is that the grip angle, first off, is a traditional 18 degree type 1911 angle. And this is your traditional point of aim for a handhold, as opposed to a 22 degree with the hump angle on a Glock, which is why I had to build out the top here just to try to get a more natural point of aim. But this comes stock on here. This has been one of the biggest gripes that people have had for a long time, is the ridiculous humps that Glock has put on their frames that they've now done away with on the Magpul grip. And the other nice thing about the Magpul grip is it comes with 3/4 scale TSP grip texture. So even though the texture looks slight on the film, it is perfect because it's not too aggressive where it digs into you when you're concealed carrying, but it gives you a really nice purchase on the gun and makes it easy to fire that. Another nice thing about this gun is that one of the biggest changes about this gun is that it has a serialized fire control insert, or what they call in SIG, the fire control unit, where now, unlike a Glock that has serialization all over the damn gun, right? But the reality is the serialized component of the gun is the frame, and the frame and the grip is what gives people most of the problems with the Glocks. This is no longer now with this, because what they've done is they've done something similar to what SIG did when they came out with their fire control units, which is they took the ability to take one component, which is your trigger assembly, serialize that, and make everything else an accessory onto the gun. This was one of the main reasons, for example, why SIG won the military contract and Glock lost. A lot of people said, hey, Glock is a more superior handgun. They should have picked the Glock. Well, the reality is they were looking for modularity. They liked the idea that there was a serialized fire control unit that made it so that they can change things out and swap things out much easier on the handgun. And that is one of the main reasons why Glock lost the contract, because again, a traditional Glock has serializations all over the gun compared to where you only really need it, which is on the fire control unit. Now the MSRP for the MXR is around $499. Now this one was on sale for $399 at the store that I recently had. And if you compare that, for example, to a Glock 19 Gen 5 MOS, it's around $620, give or take, at the time of filming. So a Glock Gen 5 that also is the MOS or has the rail mount is around $220 more, give or take, than a Ruger. And then also on the opposite of that extreme, you have the PSA dagger, which I've also reviewed previously, which is another Glock 19 clone, which comes in around $80 to $100 less, but some of the features are a little bit different on that as well. Now, just real quickly, how does this weigh? It is a traditional Glock. There's no point in really comparing them to the other Glock 19s because they're all about the same, but unloaded it comes in around 1 pound 5 ounces. Fully loaded, carried, it comes in about 1 pound 15 ounces, or if you have an additional round in magazine, you're basically carrying about a 2 pound handgun. Now, as far as reliability is concerned, I fired 500 rounds through this, and one of the things that sets aside Glocks from everybody else is the fact that it is one of the most reliable, dependable handguns in the world. So if you copy that model and do it well, you should be able to have the same reliability. Now, these guns have only come out just recently, but everything I've done when I fired it to broke it down, to look at the internals, which almost all of which are traditional Gen 3, so you can swap them out with other components. I put about 500 rounds through this, multiple loads, including my hard cast, my hollow points, you name it. I've not had one single issue. The ejections were clean, the feeds were all clean, everything was what I would typically expect out of a Glock that I also get out of this Glock clone. Now, looking in more detail, I want to talk about what makes this really unique, which is this fire control unit, this serialized fire control unit. Now, all of my guns on the table have been checked. And what I want to do now is I'm going to show you how this looks first off in comparison to a Glock frame. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to disassemble this so that you can take out this fire control unit and put it into another frame when they come out. So on this side here you have the traditional Glock frame, and then this one you have the new RXM. Now, one of the main differences you're going to notice here is they made the serialized unit one piece as opposed to having multiple pieces here on the traditional Glock. The other thing you're going to notice here is there's a frame that comes around here that surrounds the fire control unit that is not currently present on a traditional Glock frame, and this will allow you to pop out the entire unit and take it out and remove it. There's some other small components here as well I'll show you on the disassembly, but essentially this is the gun right here, this serialized component, as opposed to a Glock. Now, many of these components that are on internally within this Glock you can change out for Gen 3 other types of components, but there is a fundamental difference here between the two. Now, how do you disassemble this? Well, it's fairly easy. You've got, for example, you've got two locking pins here. You've got a pin here, and then you've got a new pin that you normally don't see on a Glock that keeps this housed into the frame. So each one of these you're going to ultimately want to drive out with a punch. And traditionally, for example, with a Glock, you would take a punch here, and oftentimes you want to wiggle this a little bit to kind of get this pin loose. Okay, and now that we have the first retention pin removed, we're going to remove the second pin. Now, the second pin is a little bit larger on the left side than the right side, so this is obviously the side you want to drive it out through. So in this case, again, I'm going to take a punch. And then you can see it come out of the frame here, and I want to work it all the way through until it pops out. Now, the final thing you're going to want to do is remove the takedown wings, and there is a retention spring right here that all you have to do is depress the detention spring to take the slack off of it, and then it drops immediately right out of the gun. So you want to lay that right here. Now you can fully remove your fire control insert or fire control unit. And in this case, again, this is a relatively new gun, so I want to take my time on here, slowly wiggle out, and then now you can see how it removes. So this is now your gun, your serialized component, your serialized gun. You can see the serial number right here. And then what you can do is you can buy as many of these types of replacement grip modules, if you will, that you can replace this with and simply drop this in. So what it does is it anchors down in here, which is why you don't need a pin here anymore. And then you push it down in, and then you reverse the process of inserting all the other components that we had before. So basically, when you reassemble, all you have to do is push back the previous pins as well as the slide lock and be able to reinsert it again. So it's not that complicated of a process. It is as easy as, for example, the process used to do a SIG. No, SIG is actually easier because at least you only have one button that you have to remove. In this case, you have 2 pins as well as the slide catch, but it's still not that hard to do. And what I would recommend is, if you have any questions, there is in the owner's manual, they actually show you the instructions on how to do this. So just keep your owner's manual in your box. So if you ever have to change out your fire control insert, you can easily do that and reference that as a guide in order to make that happen. So once you have it all reassembled, all you want to do is just go ahead and check it again just to make sure that it's functioning and working properly for you. So in looking real quickly at the RXM, who would like this gun? Well, first off, people that hate the ergonomics of a stock Glock would like this gun. If you don't like the hump, if it feels like a block or holding a 2x4 in your hand, anything of that nature, this is probably going to be a much better answer for you compared to a stock Glock. The second thing is if you're a new gun buyer or a value gun buyer. If you're a new gun buyer and somebody was asking me, would you prefer to get a Ruger over a Glock, I would recommend in this case the Ruger. To me, it's a better value. It's cheaper, a couple $100 cheaper than buying the Glock, and the reliability, at least from what I've seen, is better, and quite honestly, it has better features on it. The other people that I think would like this gun would be people in anti-gun states that make owning one or more handguns difficult. And you know which states those are. Those are states like New York, etc., that you have to go through a extensive process just to get a serialized gun to not only purchase but to own. So in that case, if they're restricting how many guns you can own or making it more difficult to own more than one gun, having this modularity is should be very appealing to you, because in this case, of course, you can swap out to a larger grip frame to hold 17 rounds, a longer slide to have a Glock 17 type slide, all the types of features and functions that you're going to receive here shortly as additional add-ons or features to your grip module. And then the final people that might like this are previous Glock owners that just simply wanted a platform with more flexibility. If you're one of these people that have a Glock or multiple Glocks and they're just sitting in your safe, right? Because you wanted different types of Glocks. You wanted 17, a 19, a 26, things of that nature. The reality is you can pretty much do all those now in one platform. So if you want that flexibility to be able to make these changes and to customize a little bit better without having to do all this type of custom gun work, that's somebody else that might actually like this. Now, who wouldn't like this new Ruger? The first one is if you're a left-handed shooter, well, you got a problem, because your slide release that you have which is ambi on a Glock Gen 5 is not currently ambi on this gun. So if you're a left-hander, you might actually want to go for a Glock instead, simply because you have the ambi controls on the slide release. And the final people that wouldn't like this are probably people that still think that Glock is always going to be their best and only option. They've been hearing the name for a long time, it's been in movies for a long time, but the reality is Glock has always struggled with continuing innovation on their platform, which is why you see all these new offerings out here providing, in my opinion, much better and much more versatile options than what Glock had previously provided and introduced many decades ago. So, final observations. The RXM has finally done for Glock shooters what Glock never really did for themselves, which is take the most popular handgun platform in the world and bring it into the 21st century. For me, the RXM is the Glock I always wanted to buy decades ago, but never could until now. And ironically, I can now do that for a lower price as well. In the months ahead, we'll likely see a flood of new grip modules. I'm not a big fan of the gray color, so you're going to see these initial offerings are kind of like a darker gray color. I think they did that because every handgun out there that's polymer seems to have a black frame on it, right? So just give it a little bit of a contrast. But if you're like me, you're probably not in love with this color. I'll eventually change this out over time once I get different color options out here from Magpul. The other thing I would anticipate over time is, like, for example, with the PSA Dagger, they take the same type of grip, but they make it ergonomically more comfortable. They do more rounding on the side panels as well as on the front and back panels, which to me is a more comfortable ergonomically option than a traditional Glock 19 or even what Magpul produced here. Now, what Magpul produced here is excellent, but it can always be better. And PSA proved simply enough by their grip module, or their grip, if you will, on their gun, with the more rounding features on the side panels and the front and back. It's just a better option. So you're going to probably see more ergonomic options as well for these grip panels. I wouldn't be surprised as well if you see better, higher capacity steel magazine options in the future from Magpul. For example, as I've talked about before with Glocks, is Glocks have these polymer, and you have the polymer around steel magazines, which are highly reliable and very durable, but at the same time they take away from capacity. So there's no reason why a company like Magpul can come around with the same dimension magazine that has a larger capacity that can hold, for example, maybe 17 or 18 rounds in a Glock 19 type frame that otherwise is restricted to 15 rounds as well. So I would anticipate you might see things like that coming from really good companies like Magpul, etc. You'll also likely to see the usual, slide length differentials. So there'll be, I'm sure, longer slides. There'll be porting and other types of variations you'll see, as well as I mentioned before, all different types of grip modules that you can put on here. Again, being a modular gun platform, this now will support this as a Glock. If this sells as I suspect, and in the months and years ahead, don't be surprised if somebody sees you shooting a Glock and asks you, how do you like your Ruger? And that might be all the difference in the world of what is truly ahead for this handgun, which in my opinion is exactly what Glock should have been doing decades ago. And Ruger finally caught up with them, and in accompanying and working with Magpul has now released, in my opinion, what is the best variant of the most popular handgun ever sold. So that's my review of the Ruger RXM. If you like this video or like our channel, please subscribe on YouTube, and thanks for watching.